My name is Eleanor Hart, and I am 66 years old. I spent most of my life working quietly as a librarian in a public school, then later as a cashier at the neighborhood grocery store when the library cut its staff. I never thought of myself as rich or poor, just steady. I raised my only son with the belief that decency mattered more than dollars. That belief was tested on the afternoon I walked into his penthouse for dinner. The first thing that hit me wasn't the scent of dinner. It was the view. The floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the sky like a movie screen. Below us, the lights of Cleveland flickered against the dark water of Lake Erie. My granddaughter, Maya, was chasing a toy across the marble floor, her laughter echoing in the vaulted room. I felt proud for a moment, as if my son's success was partly mine. That moment ended quickly. Nolan, my son, slid a thick stack of papers across the glass table. His wife, Sloane, was perched at the bar with a glass of white wine, checking her phone. Nolan didn't even wait for me to sit down before he said, "Mom, I need you to sign this. It's a financial separation agreement. Basically, it makes sure that whatever happens to you doesn't become our problem." The words landed harder than any layoff notice I had ever received. Just that morning, I had been told that the store was closing and that my part-time position was no longer needed. I came here, tired and shaken, hoping at least for comfort. Instead, my son looked me in the eye and said, "You've had a tough run, but I can't let you drag us down. You can't be a loser and expect us to carry it." I stared at him, waiting for the grin that would tell me he was joking. There was no grin. His jaw was tight, his hair perfectly styled, his tie loosened just enough to look casual, but his eyes were cold. Sloane didn't even look up. She swirled her glass and said, "It's really just a formality. Eleanor, it protects everyone. We have to think of Maya, too." Maya? My sweet girl. She climbed onto my lap just then, holding her stuffed bear, unaware of the legal wall her parents were building between me and them. Her small hand brushed my cheek as she whispered, "Grandma, are you staying for dessert?" I wanted to say yes, but my throat tightened. I picked up the pen Nolan had placed beside the papers. My hand didn't tremble, though my chest felt hollow. I signed each page where the sticky tabs pointed, the sound of the pen scratching louder than any conversation in that silent, expensive room. When I finished, Nolan stacked the pages neatly, slid them back into his leather folder, and nodded as if a business transaction had been completed. "Thank you," he said, already reaching for his phone. "This makes things cleaner. You'll be fine." I pushed my chair back and rose slowly. My knees ached, but my voice was steady. "You're right. Nolan," I said. "Things will be cleaner now." He didn't notice the way I was looking at him. He didn't hear the quiet promise I was making to myself. As I kissed Maya on the forehead and told her I would see her soon, my mind was already racing. I walked out of that penthouse into the cold night air with the papers tucked under my arm. I had lost my job, but I had not lost my strength. That was the night I decided to make sure my son learned what respect truly costs. That night, after leaving the penthouse, I didn't go straight home. I drove aimlessly through the city streets, past diners with their neon signs buzzing and couples leaning into each other at crosswalks. The folder with Nolan's agreement sat on the passenger seat, its edges sharp against the leather. I kept glancing at it, half expecting the words "loser" to crawl off the page and burn themselves into the windshield. When I finally reached my small apartment on the west side, the silence inside pressed down on me. The radiator hissed. The pipes clanged like an old man coughing in his sleep. I laid the papers on my kitchen table, smoothed them out with my palm, and stared. My signature looked like it belonged to a stranger, someone beaten down and willing to comply. But that wasn't me. Not anymore. I made a pot of weak coffee even though it was near midnight. As the steam rose, I reached for the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Martin Cole, a lawyer my late husband Graham had once trusted when he handled the estate of an elderly neighbor. His voice, still gravelly and steady, answered after 2 rings. "Eleanor, it's been a long time. I need your help." "Martin," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, "and I need absolute discretion." He didn't ask questions right away. He listened, like Graham used to, letting me pour the whole story into the receiver, the job loss, the dinner, the papers, Nolan's words. There was a pause on the line, the kind that stretches long enough to test your patience. "Finally," Martin said, "come by my office in the morning. Bring the papers. And Eleanor, don't blame yourself for signing. Sometimes a signature is just the beginning." I barely slept. When the sky lightened with the first streaks of gray, I dressed carefully, wool coat, scarf, shoes polished though no one would notice. In Martin's office, the air smelled of leather and old books. He read every page of Nolan's so-called agreement with his glasses perched low on his nose. Then he set them down and looked at me. "Legally, this paper cuts you off from liability," he explained. "It doesn't cut your son off from morality. And as far as your future, Eleanor, you're in a far stronger position than you realize." He pulled a thick envelope from his drawer. "Your Aunt Agatha's estate. She named you sole beneficiary. It's been sitting in trust, waiting. Real assets, carefully managed, waiting for the right moment. The papers arrived this week." I sat frozen. Agatha, eccentric, private, distant. Yet somehow she had left behind more than trinkets and rumors. Martin's words washed over me. Blue chip art, holdings in a family trust, liquid funds cleared for distribution, numbers I couldn't fathom. The humiliation from the night before collided with this revelation. My son, who called me a burden, had no idea that the mother he dismissed as a loser now held the kind of resources that could shift the ground under his polished shoes. Martin leaned forward. "This isn't just money. It's an opportunity. You can decide what kind of lesson to give, whether you want to protect him or whether you want him to learn what respect actually costs." I thought of Nolan's voice, sharp as glass. "Loser." My hand tightened around the folder. "I want him to learn," I said. Martin nodded. "Then we'll begin." The following week, I stood outside the Ashbury building with a scarf pulled tight against the wind. The brick facade was weathered but sturdy, the kind of structure that had seen decades of tenants come and go. Sloane's studio occupied the second floor, its logo painted neatly on the glass. I remembered when she first bragged about the space, how it gave her credibility with clients. She never realized who truly held the strings in buildings like this. Martin's team had already filed the letter of intent. All that remained was due diligence, inspections, and the closing. When the paperwork cleared, I would own the very roof under which my daughter-in-law ran her business. I traced the edge of the envelope in my pocket, my offer letter, before stepping inside to meet the property manager. He was courteous, almost eager. "Mrs. Hart, we're glad to have a serious buyer. This building needs an owner who will invest in upkeep. I believe in preservation," I said calmly, "and in fair terms for tenants who respect their obligations." By the time I left his office, I could already picture the notice sliding under Sloane's door. 60 days to adjust to market rent, with conditions for continued tenancy. Not a threat, not revenge, just business. 2 days later, another move. Lake Erie Savings released a list of commercial loans available for purchase. Martin flagged one immediately. Ashen Alder Studio, guaranteed by Sloane herself. We acquired the servicing rights through Rowan Family Office. That afternoon, a polite letter went out, informing her that payments were now to be directed to a new administrator, me. I imagined her surprise, but I did not linger on it. There was more work ahead. The next week, I entered the glass doors of Pierce & Willow Mutual. The lobby was polished, with tall plants reaching toward the ceiling and the faint hum of printers in the background. I signed in as a prospective investor, escorted upstairs by a young associate who spoke too quickly. Nolan did not know I was there. Not yet. The CEO, Victor Lang, greeted me warmly. He had the tired eyes of a man who had seen too many financial storms, but his handshake was steady. We sat in a conference room overlooking the city. He walked me through client portfolios, retention rates, risk exposure. I listened, asked precise questions, and let him see that I was more than a retired librarian. At the end of the meeting, Victor leaned back. "Your interest is timely. We've been looking for capital to stabilize our enterprise accounts. With your investment, we could shore up the gaps and expand." I nodded. "I'm willing to commit, but I'll need transparency. I want to see the retention reports, especially Nolan Hart's division." Victor raised a brow. "Nolan is ambitious. He brings in clients, though sometimes his methods are flashy. But yes, you'll see everything." I left the building with a signed preliminary agreement. My footsteps echoed in the marble hall, steady and deliberate. Each move tightened the web, the building, the loan, the stake in his company. None of it was reckless. All of it was deliberate. That evening, I sat by the window in my apartment, watching snow fall against the streetlights. I thought of Maya's question, "Grandma, are you staying for dessert?" And the ache in my chest grew sharper. I wanted to shield her from the storm I was creating, but storms sometimes clear the air. The pen had signed my separation. Now it was signing my return. Snow still clung to the sidewalks the morning I returned to Pierce & Willow. My role there was still hidden under the veil of a new investor, but the impact had already begun to ripple. Retention reports crossed my desk, showing cracks in Nolan's client base. Numbers on paper revealed what I had sensed in his personality for years. He was quick to win attention, but careless with loyalty. Victor met me in the hall and lowered his voice. "One of Nolan's major accounts is threatening to leave. They're unhappy with the follow-up. If we lose them, it could rattle others." I nodded as though this were simply a business concern. But inside, I felt the sting of irony. My son, who dismissed me as baggage, was now scrambling to hold on to what he thought defined him. That afternoon, I visited the Ashbury building again. The ink on the deed was still fresh. A notice was printed, folded, and slipped beneath the door of Ash and Alder Studio. 60 days to adjust rent to market standards, with new requirements for insurance coverage and deposit. No threats, no theatrics, just lawful business. Through the glass, I glimpsed Sloane's face as she read the letter. Her brows tightened, lips pressed thin. She glanced around as if expecting someone to appear and explain it away, when no one did. She sank into her chair, pulling at her phone with frantic fingers. Later that evening, Nolan called me for the first time in weeks. His tone was clipped. "Mom, I heard you've been involved with some investors in my company. Is that true?" I steadied my breath. "I've placed capital where it matters. Transparency. Remember? You always told me business is about leverage." Silence stretched long enough that I could picture him grinding his teeth. "Just don't meddle. I can handle my accounts." He hung up before I could respond. The call left my hands trembling, not with fear, but with the faint aftershock of his voice calling me Mom again. A word I hadn't heard without disdain in months. I pressed the phone to my chest and wondered, briefly, if I was crossing a line. That doubt carried me to the church basement the next night, where I volunteered to wash dishes after a community supper. The room smelled of soup and bleach, the clatter of plates echoing off cinder-block walls. My fingers ached in the hot water, but the rhythm was steady, grounding. Maya tugged at my apron when Sloane dropped her off for choir rehearsal upstairs. "Grandma, why are you working here?" she asked, her big eyes searching mine. I bent to her level, brushing a wet strand of hair from her forehead. "Because helping people reminds me who I am," I whispered. She giggled and pressed a kiss to my cheek before darting away. For a moment, my chest softened. Was I punishing Nolan or teaching him? Was I proving my worth or letting anger guide me? As I stacked the last of the plates, steam clouding my glasses, I remembered Graham's voice. Respect is measured when no one is watching. My hands paused over the sink. The question wasn't whether my son would fall. It was whether he could rise when the spotlight disappeared. That night, I returned home with wet sleeves and a mind unsettled. The path I had chosen was still clear, but now it carried the weight of doubt along with purpose. By the 12th week, the air inside Pearson Willow carried the static of tension. Rumors had spread through the halls. An outside investor was negotiating for control. Nolan brushed them off in front of his colleagues, but I could see the unease settling in. His smile had grown tighter, his voice sharper. Victor scheduled a board meeting in the largest conference room. Frosted glass walls, a long oak table, leather chairs polished to a shine. When I walked in, the room quieted. Nolan was already there, his tie perfectly knotted. Sloane seated beside him with her tablet poised as if she were counsel. Their eyes widened when they saw me, but I kept my step steady. Victor cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we finalize the transfer of controlling shares to our new majority investor, represented by Rowan Family Office." He gestured toward me. "Mrs. Eleanor Hart." The silence cracked like glass. Nolan shot to his feet. "This is a joke, yet she can't." But the paperwork on the table said otherwise. The signatures of shareholders, the stamped approvals from regulators, the completed due diligence, every line was inked and sealed. Martin Cole, seated quietly at the end of the table, slid the final folder forward. I looked at my son. 3 months ago, you asked me to sign something too, remember? I reached into my bag and pulled out the agreement Nolan had pressed into my hands that night at the penthouse. I laid it flat on the table. "You said you didn't want my failures to drag you down. You called me a loser." Nolan's jaw tightened. The blood had drained from his face. Sloane's fingers flew across her tablet, as if some legal clause might rescue them. "I honored your choice," I continued. "I signed away my liability, but I also signed away any obligation to cushion your pride. From this day, I am the controlling shareholder, and as such, I'm giving you 2 options." I raised 2 fingers, steady as a judge. "Option 1, you remain here, but you step down 1 level. Director, not senior vice president. No bonus for 6 months. You'll earn back respect by keeping 90% of your clients and repairing the damage you've done. After that, we'll review." Nolan's breath quickened, the cords in his neck visible. "Option 2, you walk out today. Severance equal to 3 months' salary, nothing more. The choice is yours." The room was silent but for the ticking of the wall clock. Victor folded his hands, waiting. Martin said nothing, his eyes on me. Sloane finally leaned forward. "This is humiliating. Yeah, you can't treat him like some—" I cut her off, calm as stone. "Your studio remains a tenant if you meet the lease requirements. Market rent, updated insurance, financial transparency. If not, you'll vacate. This isn't humiliation. It's accountability." Nolan's fists clenched on the table. For a moment, I thought he might explode, but instead he sank back into his chair, eyes glassy with rage and confusion. I gathered the papers into a neat stack and rose. You once said things would be cleaner this way. You were right. Consider this the clean slate you asked for. I left the room as the weight of silence followed me out, the click of my heels echoing against the marble hallway. Behind me, the empire my son thought was untouchable had shifted, and every step I took was a reminder that respect is not inherited, it is earned. The days after the boardroom confrontation felt strangely quiet. Snow melted into slush along the sidewalks, and the city seemed to exhale after months of holding its breath. For the first time in weeks, I walked without rushing. No letters to deliver, no contracts to sign. Yet inside me, a storm still moved slowly, heavy and deliberate. News of the ownership change rippled quickly through Pearson Willow. Some employees whispered in hallways. Others watched Nolan with wary eyes. He remained at his desk, stripped of his title, his nameplate replaced with a simpler one: Director, Client Retention. It was a demotion, but not exile. I had given him the chance to work, not posture. At the Ashbury building, Sloan's studio complied with the new terms. The checks arrived on time, insurance updated, financial statements finally in order. Her smile at networking events was thinner, but her company survived. That was enough for me. I had no desire to crush her, only to remind her that image alone cannot pay the bills. And yet, even with these victories, I felt no joy. At night, I lay awake in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling fan. Nolan's words still echoed, but so did Maya's laughter. Punishment, I realized, was never the true goal. What I wanted was transformation. One Saturday morning, I sat in the pew of St. Luke's Church, the same one where I washed dishes weeks before. The choir rehearsed, voices rising through the rafters. Maya waved at me from the front row, her hair tied back with a red ribbon. She didn't care about ownership stakes or market rent. She cared that her grandmother showed up. After rehearsal, Nolan approached me in the parking lot. He looked different, shoulders heavy, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Mom," he said softly, as if the word might break between his teeth. I was wrong about everything." The apology hung there, fragile. I didn't rush to catch it. "You hurt me." I answered. "You forgot who I was. And worse, you forgot who you were." He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Tell me how to fix it." I thought of Graham, of the nights he told me that respect is proven when no one watches. So I gave Nolan a path. "For the next 30 days, I said, you'll come to the church basement with me. No cameras, no one to impress. You'll serve food, wash dishes, carry boxes, no titles, no suits. Just work. At the end of those 30 days, I'll decide if you've remembered how to be a son." Nolan swallowed hard, but he agreed. Weeks later, I saw him in that basement, sleeves rolled up, soap on his hands, listening to the stories of men and women who had nothing. He moved quietly, no boasting, no excuses. Sometimes, when he thought no one noticed, his eyes softened as he watched Maya ladle soup beside me. I did not forgive him all at once. Forgiveness, like respect, must be earned slowly. But I felt something loosen in my chest. The anger cooled, leaving room for something sturdier. Hope. That spring, I established the Graham Hart Scholarship, funded through the trust Aunt Agatha had left me. It would support children from working-class families, the kind Nolan once belonged to before he forgot. When I handed Maya her violin case after school, she looked up at me with a smile too big for her small face. "Grandma, you're not a loser," she said. I laughed, the sound surprising even myself. "No, darling, I never was." Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.